Hey folks, Charlie here, and I'm just going to jump right into today's topic, dealing with the lost colony of Roanoke. And yes, if you've been tuning into the latest season of American Horror Story, you've undoubtedly noticed the word Roanoke appear in the show's intro. Though the tale of this colony might be familiar to those from the United States, it's actually not something many of us from outside the US have learned about in our history classes. As such, before I detail the theories concerning the disappearance of Roanoke, I will first provide an overview of this original English colony in what would one day become the United States of America. The Roanoke colony, oftentimes known as the Lost Colony, was established in 1585 under the authority of Queen Elizabeth I on an island of present-day Dare County in North Carolina, with the aim of creating a permanent English settlement in the Americas. What many don't realize, however, is that the colony was in fact established and vanished multiple times on Roanoke Island. During the initial exploration along the coast and visits to the native settlements in the area, the English entered the scene in quite a shocking way. These early voyagers apparently blamed the natives living in one of the nearby villages of stealing one of their silver cups. Whether or not there was any merit to this accusation, these soon-to-be settlers responded by sacking and burning this supposed thief's village. In spite of this, Sir Richard Grenville, the leader of the expedition, left 108 men behind to establish a colony on Roanoke Island with the promise to return in April 1586 with supplies. Though contact was made with more of the local Native Americans, the English treated them quite harshly, on several occasions going so far as to kidnap some of the local inhabitants in order to extort supplies or information from them. Due to the colonists' behavior, a number of the local natives launched an unsuccessful attack on the fort the English had built in the area. While they were able to repel the attack, some colonists did choose to leave when an English ship traveling from the Caribbean to England offered them transportation along the way. Finally, when the official relief fleet under Grenville returned to the colony shortly thereafter, they found it completely abandoned. Despite this, in order to retain an English presence and to protect its claim to Roanoke Island, a small detachment was left behind. In 1587, another group of 115 colonists under an artist by the name of John White were traveling to the New World and were also tasked to check up on the detachment at Roanoke before heading north to the Chesapeake Bay to establish their own settlement. What they found when they reached Roanoke Island, however, was nothing but a skeleton, most likely the remains of one of the previous colonists. When they couldn't find anyone, the fleet's commander refused to let these colonists return to their ships, insisting they establish their own colony right then and there. We are still not entirely sure what motivated him to do this. Under White's leadership, the colony was able to establish greater relations with some of the local tribes, including the Croatoans on the southern half of the island. Of course, this did not include those tribes whom the earlier colonists fought with. Shortly after their establishment, one of the colonists was killed by a Native American while venturing outside the confines of the colony. The agitated settlers then persuaded their leader, John White, to return to England to explain the colony's situation in order to get some help from the mother country. Though John White sailed back to the British Isles, the remaining 115 colonists, including White's daughter, Eleanor, and his newly born granddaughter, Virginia, the first English child born in the Americas, were left behind. Due to the tumultuous weather and the war between England and Spain, White was only able to return to Roanoke Island 3 years later, on the day of his granddaughter's third birthday, August 18th, 1590. What he found when he arrived was a deserted settlement, and not a single trace of any of the 90 men, 17 women, and 11 children who had resided there. There weren't any signs of a struggle or a battle, and the one clue that was discovered was the word Croatoan carved into a post of the fence around the settlement. The colony of Roanoke was effectively lost. So with the basic story in mind, I think this is a good point to discuss the mystery and the theory surrounding the lost people of Roanoke in greater detail. Can their disappearance be explained through, quote, normal means? Were the colonists merely on the losing side of a conflict with the native inhabitants? Or was something much more sinister at play here? One popular assumption is that the colonists were slaughtered by a nearby Native American tribe. In fact, when Captain John Smith, yes, the real-life version of the guy from Disney's Pocahontas, met with the chief of the Powhatan tribe during the establishment of the successful Jamestown colony to the north of Roanoke in present-day Virginia, he inquired about the fate of the southern Roanoke colony that had vanished some 20 years prior. Chief Powhatan, perhaps shockingly, informed Smith that he had personally sought to the slaughter of these colonists, who had reportedly been living peacefully among a group of natives below his domain. That said, doesn't this scenario seem a little too convenient? What does one make of the lack of a visible struggle at the site of the colony when White returned? What of the fact that this perhaps provided a good excuse for Smith to convince the King of England at the time of Chief Powhatan's evil actions? Recent historical re-examination of these events do place some doubts on this outcome for the lost colony. So this leads us to another theory, one that the colonists in fact perhaps did become assimilated with some of the local native tribes. One historian, Lee Miller, postulated that some of the lost colony survivors effectively sought shelter with another tribe named the Roanoke. Others look to some of the other European accounts at the time, which speak of natives who had apparently learned how to build stone houses from the alleged Roanoke settlers, and others who reported seeing European captives at various Indian settlements during the same time period. Probably the most notable native involvement with this lost colony, however, comes from the Croatoans. Yes, the same word carved into a post of the fence when White returned to Roanoke. For instance, there are a number of later accounts from the early 1700s up till the mid-1800s that speak of European colonists encountering Croatoans and other Indians who once resided on Roanoke Island with gray eyes, a trait not commonly found in other native peoples at the time. One record in particular tells of French Protestants in the area meeting natives of a certain tribe with blonde hair and blue eyes, not long after their arrival. Considering the nearest Jamestown colony had no record of being attacked by the natives of this specific tribe, some believe the likelihood that the origin of those fair-skinned natives were from the lost colony is high. Though there are many of these relatively pleasant claims in existence, there are some that are quite a bit more sinister. Another common theory is that the Spanish, a nation at war with England at the time, was responsible for destroying the colony. Certainly there was a precedent for it, where the Spanish destroyed a coastal French colony in coastal South Carolina, massacring the inhabitants and then destroying the evidence of it. However, this is unlikely to be the case for Roanoke, since the Spanish were still searching to attack this colony as late as 1600, a whole 10 years after White had discovered that the colony was missing. This brings us to another idea, that in this case, it wasn't the Spanish who played a part in the colony's disappearance, but the English themselves. As the story goes, the vanishing of the colony would have been a lie created by the English to hide the fact that an entire village died of starvation, something that would have demonstrated the shameful truth that England's first colony in America failed due to neglect. And yet, even this theory is full of holes. As mentioned, John White, the man who had both departed the colony and returned to find it abandoned, had left behind his daughter and granddaughter there. Though troubled by their disappearance, there appears to be historical evidence that White lived out his remaining years in the British Isles, still optimistic that his daughter was alive and well. As such, if the colony had indeed failed due to disease and mass death, surely this man wouldn't go on living with the hopes that his only child was still alive. As one might have it, John White isn't the only one who thought that his daughter Eleanor White Dare might have survived the disappearance of the colony. This effectively leads me to what I think is the most intriguing part of the legend. In 1937, a Californian tourist claimed to have found a stone inscribed by Eleanor Dare. This stone was examined, and it was found to have stated on one side that Eleanor's husband and daughter were dead, and asked the finder to communicate the following message to her father. Ananias Dare in Virginia went hence unto heaven, 1591. Any Englishman show John White, Governor, Virginia. On the other side of the rock, it explained that all but 7 of the colonists had been killed by Native Americans. It was signed E.W.D. Though the stone was not immediately declared authentic, it was noteworthy that the content was not incompatible with its alleged historical origins. That is, the spelling on the rock conformed to expectations of Elizabethan orthography, and the necessary tools used for such an inscription were likely to have been in the possession of the colonists as well. While 47 more stones were later discovered by a local uneducated farmer in 1940, detailing all kinds of stuff and were supposedly also written by Eleanor, including that she had married a king of one of the tribes, they have been pretty much all proven to be forgeries, though some still express their doubts. Only the first of the stones discovered is perceived to have some substantive potential of being real, and to this day we are still uncertain of its authenticity. Now, I'm sure many of you are probably wondering if there wasn't some occult or paranormal activity associated with the lost colony of Roanoke, especially given the current season of American Horror Story. And the truth of the matter is that if there are any such tales of the lost colony, they certainly aren't prominent by any means. Certainly we can look to the view of the early English settlers and perceiving the natives around them as devil worshippers and that they're priests or witches, but of course it was also easier for your average turn of the 16th century Englishman to interpret anything, quote, different from his or her own faith as being demonic. Nevertheless, this is where the human psyche can run wild, and I am certainly excited to see what the present season of American Horror Story has to show in their own rendition of the Roanoke legend. Anyway, folks, I'm going to end this video here. If you want to hear more about myths and legends, or even my thoughts on things like Game of Thrones, please don't hesitate to subscribe to my channel, and of course hit that like button below. Also, be sure to check out the links I have in the info box below with other information about the Roanoke legend if you want to inform yourself more about it. Most especially, let me know what you think happened to the settlers of Roanoke. Or even if you are undecided about that, let me know what you think of the current season of AHS. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.